or your favorite beverage, everyone. Hello and welcome to the Common Discourse weekly podcast. You've stumbled upon us, whether by chance or whether by choice. Doesn't matter, you're in for a bit of a treat. I'm flying solo today. Me being Varun Prasad. Some people know me as Sexual Chocolate. Now, by some people, I do only mean, of course, the other 2/3 of the TCD crew, the Common Discourse crew, and they would be at Boogie Bumper, who many of you know from his infamous Periscope sessions. They're going pretty strong, aren't they? And then, of course, there's Adam J, the voice of reason, who unfortunately cannot join me tonight like he was supposed to. So just to give you a bit of an update, what we'll be doing is that every month the three of us will get together and belt it out like the three tenors, except, not like the three tenors, nothing like them at all actually. And to fill in the void, every week Adam J and myself will be getting together to do a kind of like a weekly roundup of political stories around the world which we thought were interesting, piqued our interest. Of course we can't report all of it because look at the political world around us. You can't keep track of it anymore. Anyway, you can find me on Gab and on Twitter at Paradigm Emerges. So without any further ado, let's get straight into some US politics. Now, I wanted to talk about Trump's travel ban. The Supreme Court actually upheld, the largely criticised ban that Trump had implemented, much to the beginning of his tenure. Let's take a bit of a read from the New York Times here, an article by Adam Liptak and Michael D. Shear. The Supreme Court upheld President Trump's ban on travel from several predominantly Muslim countries, delivering to the president on Tuesday a political victory and an endorsement of his power to control immigration at a time of political upheaval about the treatment of migrants at the Mexican border. Now, just before we go any further with this article, I thought it would be a good idea to go and see what the UN defines as a migrant. So we'll just go over to the UN website. And as you can see here, the term migrant in Article 1.1a should be understood as covering all cases where the decision to migrate is taken freely by the individual concerned for reasons of personal convenience and without intervention of an external compelling factor. Now, here's my thing, right? If this is a matter of personal convenience, there is no real cruelty implementing the full force of the law, as there's no real human rights violation. I mean, and this is the contradiction in the article, and it comes up in the very first paragraph of it. Because, on the one hand, they try to normalize them by calling them migrants, okay? So, I mean, America, US, Australia, a lot of, Western countries are nations of immigrants. So if you've got one thing against one migrant, well, you're a migrant too, No, that's not right, because if you're going to call them migrants, you cannot bestow upon them the same sympathies that you would to refugees who are, actually politically persecuted people. But the thing is, here's the conundrum. I mean, if they are migrants, then it's even more reason for these people to come through legal ports of entry. Semantics, when it comes to legal framing, it matters. So I think that's already a bit of a contradiction in the article. And like I said before, that's just the first paragraph. I'd also like to point out something else that kind of surprised me about UNESCO. I did not expect to see this. UNESCO takes into consideration the impact of migration on established communities, which the media just does not want to talk about. The forgotten people. And in this case, it's even more sad because the forgotten people here are American citizens. Those people who pay taxes, vote for governments, work. The governments are supposed to look after the safety and the security and the interests of their citizens above all else. I mean, what else is the government there to do? Because if the government's not looking after its own citizens, of course, well, they're just an extortion racket, aren't they, on a grand scale? But, don't take my word for it. Let's look at what UNESCO actually has to say about migration. Migration is an important factor in the erosion of traditional boundaries between languages. This is on the UNESCO site, by the way. I'm quoting directly. Migration is an important factor in the erosion of traditional boundaries between languages, cultures, ethnic group, and nation states. Even those who do not migrate are affected by movements of people in or out of their communities, and by the resulting changes. Migration is not a single act of crossing a border, but rather a lifelong process that affects all aspects of the lives of those involved. Again, the forgotten people. These are the people we should be hearing their voices, their stories, their concerns, but we can't do that now because it's racist. Anyway, let's just get back to the article. That's a bit of a tangent that I went on. In a 5-4 vote, the court's conservatives said that the president's power to secure the country's borders, delegated by Congress over decades of immigration lawmaking, was not undermined by Mr. Trump's history of incendiary statements about the dangers he said Muslims pose to the United States. So it was a 5-4 vote because despite the tweeting rhetoric of Trump, because let's face it, Trump can be a bit crude on Twitter, a little untoward, it doesn't change the fact that the congressional delegation of powers to secure the borders is written in law. So I'm sure the law is a much more important document than a couple of tweets. And, last time I checked, the Supreme Court's job was to uphold national laws. I don't know, I could be wrong. Maybe somebody would like to correct me on that. But see, the part that really gets me is this one here. Justice Sonia Sotomayor said the decision was no better than Korematsu versus United States, the 1944 decision that endorsed the detention of Japanese Americans during World War II. Okay. She equated the legal decision to that of Japanese internment camps where American citizens were kept under arrest. That's literally Hitler. And in true fashion, what does that do to the political and legal discourse? Don't you think that kind of talk is irresponsible? We hear a lot about the division going on these days. Now you think of people who are already fired up, with, quote unquote fake news. Let's face it, there is some fake news going on. Not all of it, some of it. It's the way that that narrative is pieced together. Now you whip them up into a frenzy, and then you say something like that. Who is causing the division in society? Well, these people are irresponsible. They're in positions of power. They cannot just willy-nilly go and compare some of the worst atrocities in history. In the Japanese internment camp, it was bad. I wouldn't call it one of the worst atrocities, but it definitely, by today's standards, it's not the right thing to do. But protecting your borders from illegal immigrants, there's no equation there. I just don't see it. Moving further along in this article, it takes another stab by saying that Trump is anti-immigrant. And that's just plain wrong. It is. This is how the polarization of the population occurs. For as much as is blamed on presidents being divisive, I think the most widely contributing factor to what is essentially the divided states of America these days is the media establishment. They really have. They've whipped everybody up into a frenzy and turned the heat up, and they're constantly turning the heat up. Constantly. What is it for? Is it for ratings? Is it an agenda? I don't know. Whatever it is, they're just not seeing straight. This is what the article states. Mr. Trump has already made clear his plans to use anti-immigrant messaging as he campaigns for Republicans, much the way he successfully deployed the issue to whip up the base of the party during the 2016 presidential campaign. Anti-immigrant? He's not anti-immigrant. Anti-illegal asylum seekers? Yes, of course. And who wouldn't be? Who wouldn't be? I mean, why should he not be? If there's high unemployment, there's high youth unemployment, or whatever kind of unemployment, one of the best things you can do is to take, some kind of control of your borders and make sure that we're not getting cheap, illegal labor, which big companies and corporations can take advantage of at the expense of the societies and communities around them. It's just amazing. I mean, I just don't understand how these people cannot see. These are our leaders. Well, not my leader, but similar sort of things happen in all Western nations. But what's happening in America right now is just amplified. Anyway, final little point I'd like to make before we move on from immigration to other matters is this little paragraph here. But as Mr. Trump celebrated his travel ban victory, a federal judge in California ordered the government to stop separating children from their parents at the border and to reunite families already separated. To that I'd say, yeah, look, Ted Cruz introduced a bill that Schumer and gang did not even want to look at, and Trump went and signed an executive order. So this little paragraph here is a little tidbit of nothing. Look, honestly, I do disagree with the executive order that Trump signed, however. I think Trump should have used the political pressure to chase the Democrats to bring in the legislation, and he should put it on them. Now, they would have been blocking the motion to stop separation of families at the border. That would have been a good political move, However, unlike the Democrats, Trump realizes there are more humane causes that are more important than partisan politics. Right? Did I just cuck out there? I don't know, maybe I did. Anyway, I want to get into other articles. Trump gets to fill Kennedy's seat, and it's all thanks to Harry Reid. How big of a win was this for President Trump? Look, he didn't have that much to do with it, but why not take the win, huh? Trump is lucky. I mean, Justice Kennedy, offers his seat. He pretty much offered a win on a silver platter to Mr. Trump. It's just amazing. It's incredible news. I just wanted to get into this first paragraph, right? And it says, in 2013, then Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid used a simple majority vote to change the Senate's rules, allowing confirmation of judicial nominees to non-Supreme Court posts by the same simple majority vote. At that moment, the politics of judicial confirmations entered their end stage. The Senate's majority now rules on when and who will get confirmed to the federal courts. So essentially, Harry Reid instated the nuclear option as a precedent when it comes to judicial nominees, and it's come to bite them in the bum big time. And he can't say he wasn't warned. Now, Justice Kennedy has announced he will be stepping down, and Trump has full control over who he chooses as an associate justice replacement. And this is the essence of what the Democrats reflect when it comes to exercising their faculties. They were eager for a win and just assumed that they'll hold the Senate forever. All those years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, they thought they would hold the Senate forever. And as an emotional response, set to the slow walking that was going on the floors there, they set the very precedent that has now slayed them. Let me just play a clip. Actually, just hang on. This is just. I think this is phenomenal. Where is it? And sorry, guys. Here we go.
Believe Congress is broken. The American people believe the Senate is broken. And I believe the American people are right. For the first time in the history of our republic, Republicans have routinely used the filibuster to prevent President Obama from appointing his executive team.
Just to stop it there for a second, Republicans have routinely used the filibuster. Let's not forget, Democrats have also used it. This is a political tactic that both parties have been guilty of using. Anyway, we'll continue.
Or confirming judges. The rule change will make cloture for all nominations other than the Supreme Court. Majority threshold vote. Yes or no. The Senate is a living thing, and to survive it must change, as it has, over the history of this great country.
Once again, Senate Democrats are threatening to break the rules of the Senate, in order to change the rules of the Senate. And over what? Over what? Over a court that doesn't even have enough work to do? The majority leader promised, over and over again, that he wouldn't break the rules of the Senate in order to change them. And let's not forget about the raw power at play here. On this point, the similarities between the Obamacare debate and the Democratic threat to go nuclear on nominations are inescapable.
It's time to change. It's time to change the Senate before this institution becomes obsolete. So I say to my Republican colleagues, you don't have to like the laws of the land, but you do have to respect those laws and acknowledge them and abide by them. Consistent and unprecedented obstruction by the Republican caucus has turned advise and consent into deny and obstruct.
Look, if advise and consent is to mean anything at all, occasionally consent is not given. But by any objective standard, Senate Republicans have been very, very fair to this president.
Is the Senate working now? Can anyone say the Senate is working now? I don't think so.
If you want to play games, set yet another precedent that you'll no doubt come to regret. Say to my friends on the other side of the aisle, you'll regret this, and you may regret it a lot sooner than you think. In other words, they believe that one set of rules should apply to them, and another set to everybody else. He may have just as well have said, if you like the rules of the Senate, you can keep them. Huh? If you like the rules of the Senate, you can keep them.
Okay, I'll end that right there. What a great way to end that speech, huh? If you like your doctor, you can keep him. If you like your health plan, you can keep it. If you like your laws, you can keep them. Just take a drink. All right. 51 to 49, majority in the Senate, favor of Republicans. Democrats, I mean, they're going to be jumping up and down now because they're in the worst position they could ever imagine. Okay, let me read this little paragraph. The left, clearly hoping for some sort of an upset in the Senate races in the fall, wants to invoke the McConnell precedent to try to generate public opposition to moving forward with a nominee to fill Justice Anthony M. Kennedy's seat this summer and early fall. It won't work. The president will quickly nominate a Kennedy replacement. Barring some unforeseen miss in the background check, the nominee will be confirmed, and probably with votes to spare, given how many Senate Democrats are facing stiff re-election in states carried by President Trump. Some Democrats, facing the certainty of confirmation, will side with the nominee and their state's voters and try to hang on to their jobs. What does that mean? The Democrats are in the worst position they can ever find themselves in, right? They want to garner support to push back the replacement decision till after the midterms. And they need to garner support from the Senate Democrats who are relying on Trump-held states for votes. This means those senators will be putting a final blow to their chances if they vote against the sentiments of their electorate. So it's like a catch-22 for them now. I mean, does Justice Kennedy's decision, does it serve as a fatal king hit on Democrats? And, I asked that question, if it's a fatal hit, because left-leaning views are almost entirely against the interests of the voting people. Who wants higher taxes? Who wants Who wants, porous borders? Who wants divisive identity politics? No one wants these things. So the Democrats rely on the judicial system to fight whatever they lose in the legislative branch of government, right? And this is why they have tried desperately over years, maybe even over decades, to vest more powers in the courts and ensure that judges are of a certain political persuasion. And now they're starting to see that they are losing. They're losing what they worked so hard to build. The Supreme Court looks like it's going to return to its textualist and originalist origins. And the Democrats are freaking out because they've now painted themselves into a corner. Look, to be honest, we really have to be clear that the Supreme Court only deals with, 2% or maybe even less than 2% of cases, presented, right? So we know that the Circuit Court of Appeals are still largely left-leaning because, that's what the left are. They're obstructionists, so of course they're going to appeal all decisions. That's kind of where that's pristine conditions for them, But, looking for example at the Ninth Circuit, massively left, goes all the way down the West Coast. I think it starts from Massachusetts out to the coast and all the way down to Arizona. This is still a major fight. So this is something that Trump still needs to look at in the battles that he's fighting. But anyway, each step at a time. And as a final thought from me, I'd just like to say that I wish the pick that Trump chooses is Amy Barrett, because she's a true constitutional originalist, and also because it would be such a slap on Dianne Feinstein's and the Democrats' face, who heckled her for her Catholic beliefs, seeing it as some kind of human detriment to be of Catholic faith. Let's just have a look at some of the things that they said. Just one second. Here we go. The dogma lives loudly within you, Feinstein said, and that's of concern when you come to big issues that large numbers of people have fought for years in this country. Sheldon Whitehouse, the Democratic senator from Rhode Island, expressed frustration that Barrett and her fellow nominee at the hearing, Michigan Supreme Court Justice Joan Larson, refused to discuss how their personal beliefs might shape their legal thinking. He and the other Democratic senators seem to believe that religious convictions affect how judges apply the law. To sit here and pretend that there is no role for people's personal and private views when they go to the court, it's so preposterous as to be silly, Whitehouse said. You are controversial. Let's start with that, Feinstein said during the hearing. You're controversial because many of us who have lived our lives as women really recognizing the value of finally being able to control our reproductive systems, and Roe entered into that. Obviously, you have a long history of believing that your religious beliefs should prevail. I mean, that would be just such a slap on their face, to belittle Amy Barrett like that because of her Catholic beliefs. Remember Maxine?
God is on our side.
No, Maxine, God is certainly not on your side. Anyway, that's enough of US for today. I'm going to take a little hop, skip and a jump across the Atlantic Pond and head over to the EU. Merkel's had a few problems lately. I think she's keeping herself buoyant, but I don't know how long things can last. But let's just look at some of the people around her, right? You've got Macron here. So he's now, this is from Deutschland, by the way. He's seen as Merkel's partner, okay? So let's see the other people around her. There's 8 people here that are of key interest to German Chancellor Angela Merkel. 2, Pedro Sanchez, the socialist of Spain, just came in on a non-confidence vote. We've spoke about it a few weeks ago on the Common Discourse Podcast. A socialist, by the way. A socialist. Strong socialist. As soon as he came in, what did he do? He accepted turnaround migrants from Italy who have just brought into power a populist coalition. He brought them into Spain. And I think it was about a week or two after that, he got another 600 migrants coming in from Africa, into Spain. Yeah, that's socialism for you. Mark Rutte, the mediator. Okay, so I suppose this is the guy who's going to play the fence sitter. You know, he's going to try to work out the arguments between EU member states, because let's face it, there are a few crevices forming in the EU. I mean, if Cyprus is the tactician for the EU, far left Greek politician, like I'm talking far left, they're in bad shape. They're in worse shape than we thought. The radical Lars Løkke Rasmussen, Danish Prime Minister. See, you know why this guy is a radical? Because he wants to enforce his borders. He does not want refugees coming in willy-nilly into his country. That's now considered radicalism. You know, breaking down institutions and structures, such as we've seen today, actually, in Portland, Antifa-style movements, that's not considered radical anymore. No, this is radicalism. Protecting your borders. Remember the days that was known as invasion? The rival, Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz. Handsome young fella, this one. He's, look, it says he's polite with Merkel, but he takes a strong stance against the EU. You know, I'm really enjoying what I'm seeing from this sort of, I mean, I don't know if Austria is very Eastern Bloc, but I'm enjoying a lot what I see from Hungary and Poland. And it seems like people are starting to wake up and follow in their footsteps. We've seen Austria, Italy take that sort of populist approach. The hounded one, Giuseppe Conte, we were just speaking about the Italians. So this is the Prime Minister that they've put up, the coalition, the two populist parties in Italy who've come together and put it pretty much a person not affiliated strongly to either party, and to keep the balance, to keep it fair, I suppose. And the indifferent one, Orban. I mean, this guy he's based. Orban is based. This guy's got power. It just oozes power. He does not care. Does not give two hoots to what people think of him. But, funnily enough, I've heard that, and this is just hearsay, but I've heard that within Hungary, people aren't very fond of him. Especially in terms of looking after the economy. But the one thing that they do unite behind him is that he likes to protect Hungary's borders, and it's something of strong belief in him. And so that one single cause is what's keeping him in power over there. EU leaders reach migration deal after marathon talks in Brussels. EU leaders have ended 12 hours of virulent talks in Brussels with a deal on migration. German Chancellor Angela Merkel's future in office had been tied to whether she could come up with an acceptable EU agreement. Okay, so let's just have a bit of a look at what happened in this 21 hours of talk. Okay, the deal includes vague wording on closed reception centres of migrants within the bloc. EU countries willing to establish the centres would process migrants and asylum seekers on their territory. So let me just ask, which countries are willing to have these reception centres? I mean, we've seen Brussels and Merkel throw Greece under the bus in the years that's gone by. Italy won't be putting their hand up anytime soon. I mean, if interior nations decide to do this, then there's the issue of getting asylum seekers there from their points of entry, meaning potential travel through other nations. I don't know. I mean, if that's the case, I foresee messiness. What else? It also proposes screening migrants for their eligibility to apply for asylum before they reach the EU. Countries in North Africa and the Middle East would be offered EU financial aid in exchange for agreeing to set up screening centres the deal calls regional disembarkation platforms. Really? I mean, overseas screening centres? How reliable would they be? we are talking about corrupt African politicians and powers running the system. It's a bit of a joke. Okay, look, as one of their measures, fine, but once they get to the border, that's where the screening should happen. What else does it say? Merkel said leaders had also agreed to strong internal checks to stop asylum seekers from freely choosing an EU country in which to apply asylum for. Look, I like the opportunity to curtail the freedom of movement allowed to asylum seekers. That's an encouraging sign, but of course that was the whole problem to begin with, right? The Schengen program. This is what we always said from the beginning. Well, not we, but everyone who could see the problems going on in Europe. I mean, Merkel, she opened up the borders to the entire world in 2015, and then they were allowed the benefits of Schengen movement, so they could move anywhere. So essentially, she was just allowing these potential enemies of state to go to other countries, and now she's in the world of trouble. I mean, why did it take so long for her to realize that this was not a good move? It's beyond me. When all the signs were there, everyone was telling her, this is going to blow up in your face. But, better late than never, I suppose. When you have your party teetering on the brink of collapse, if you're not going to see the light then, when are you going to see it? Italy had earlier refused to sign off on any joint conclusions from the meeting, which also included wording on Brexit and security. Unless other EU governments agreed to compromise on migration, well, that's again Italy's new stance. Because let's face it, they faced the brunt of the problems. The EU leaders agreed to pay another 3 billion euros. That's 3.497 billion US dollars to Turkey in the second installment of the 2016 compensation deal for Ankara's efforts to keep migrants away from Europe. I find it disturbing that the EU, which is constantly talking about the far-right fascists and dictators, are willing to kowtow to a fascist dictator in Turkey, Erdogan. And look, just as a side note on Erdogan, his visit to England, it was smooth. There were no hiccups, nothing. We barely even heard about it. Meanwhile, Trump's visit to the UK. It hasn't even occurred yet, but it's being treated like Satan himself is flying in to take sweet, innocent little migrants back to hell so he can feast on their souls. It's just amazing, the hypocrisy. And just the willful ignorance, the willful blindness of people and the way they behave. They pretend to fight the very things that they're actually endorsing in many ways. Anyway, just on a final note, I'd like to read this couple of lines. Merkel said she was optimistic that the EU could continue working towards solving irregular migration after it had sent a good signal in agreeing on a common position. And French President Emmanuel Macron said it is European cooperation that has won the day. So blah, 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 all these... Look, all this meeting was 21 hours to come to the agreement that they need an agreement. And that sums it up. They didn't solve any problem. No issues were really actually addressed. No one said, okay, this is what we're going to do. No one put a plan. But look, like I said, one step forward is better than, 2 steps backwards, I suppose. So congratulations. I'll clap. I'll give them a good clap over there. They've got an agreement to make an agreement. Okay, let's see how this carries on forward as we go forth. So anyway, look, I'm going to keep it short and sweet. That was my show for today. Hopefully next week I'll have Adam J, the voice of reason. Look, he's really under the pump. Poor chap, working hard, keeping the economy going. But hopefully he can join me next week, and we'll keep you up to date when the three of us get together for our monthly podcast. Okay, so again, you can find me on Twitter and on Gad at Paradigm Emerges. That's PARADIGMS Emerges. And give me a follow. I'll give you a follow back. I hope you enjoyed, short and sweet analysis. And I'll see you guys next time. See ya.